Amelia Island celebrates Fish to Fork on May 15th to 18th, 2025 at Omni Amelia Island Resort and Spa, featuring fishing and culinary dock-to-dish specialties in a fun, interactive atmosphere. More info at ameliaisland.com/fish-to-fork. The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, we talk about proposed state laws that could impact everything from STD testing for teens to how neighborhoods improve themselves. Attorney and government expert Chris Hand joins us with the latest state and local headlines. Then, a recent fire won't stop the upcoming performance at Players by the Sea. We talk to the cast of the musical Waitress and theater leadership about taking the show on the road. Join the conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email First Coast Connect at wjct.org or tag us on social media. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
In Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. China says there are no talks underway with the United States about trade. Beijing says any reports saying so are false. This comes after President Trump said there's been direct contact between China and the U.S. every day. NPR's John Ruwich reports from Shanghai.
China's Foreign Ministry and Commerce Ministry both issued unequivocal statements. Commerce Ministry spokesperson He Yadong said there were, quote, absolutely no negotiations between the two sides. And Foreign Ministry spokesman Guo Jiakun echoed that at a daily news conference. He said, as far as he knows, there have been no consultations or negotiations over tariffs, let alone any agreement. Trump said this week that he expects tariffs on China, now at 145%, to come down substantially. And he suggested that negotiations with Beijing are actively underway. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was reported to have said on Tuesday talks had not begun. Foreign Ministry spokesman Guo said the door is open to dialogue, but it must be based on equality, mutual respect, and reciprocity. John Ruwich, NPR News, Shanghai.
India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi says his country will find the attackers who killed 26 people this week. Most victims were Hindu men. NPR's Dia Hadid reports from Mumbai. Indian officials are blaming Pakistan, which denies responsibility.
Modi said India would find and punish, quote, every terrorist, their handlers, their backers.
We will pursue them.
The attack outraged many Indians, not just for the scale of the killing, but the context. Gunmen attacked tourists in a meadow, turning a scenic attraction into a killing field. They targeted men. Eyewitnesses told local media that gunmen asked if they were Muslims before killing them. The group which claimed responsibility for the attack is seen as a proxy for the Pakistani military. On Wednesday, India said it was suspending its decades-old water treaty with Pakistan. Pakistani officials say the attack was a pretext by India to deny the country water. Dia Hadid, NPR News, Mumbai.
In the U.S., the National Institutes of Health plans to include private health information in a study of rising rates of autism spectrum disorder. NPR's John Hamilton reports the study is part of a larger federal effort to find the causes of autism.
NIH Director Jay Bhattacharya says the agency will create a national database of autistic people, then look for factors that might have contributed to their diagnosis. The effort will use data from private doctors and insurance companies, as well as government health programs. One goal is to identify environmental exposures that could cause autism. But Dr. David Mandel of the University of Pennsylvania says that's unlikely.
The exposure is probably in utero, and it looks like we're studying children after they're born.
There's also concern that sensitive private information used in the study could become public. John Hamilton, NPR News.
You're listening to NPR.
You're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Good morning, I'm Stephen Ponson. It's 9:04. Give yourself plenty of time to get where you need to go this morning. We've got heavy delays in both directions on the East Beltway through the Sandalwood area due to a vehicle fire. That vehicle fire is on the East Beltway southbound before Beach Boulevard. If you are looking for an alternate, Southside Boulevard would be your alternate. Jacksonville's homeless population appears to have shrunk somewhat. According to the 2025 point-in-time count, there were nearly 300 fewer unsheltered people this year sleeping in cars and on the street on the night of January 30th when volunteers canvassed the area. The annual census is the responsibility of the Northeast Florida advocacy organization Changing Homelessness. CEO Don Gilman says the government-mandated point-in-time count is a way for service providers like hers to assess their progress in combating homelessness. She thinks this year's lower number may be because the unhoused are more hidden.
People are going deeper into the woods or in wooded areas. There are more people that we are watching go into abandoned buildings, which is something we do not send volunteers into abandoned buildings to try to interact that way.
Gilman says outreach teams go out Monday through Friday to find and offer assistance to homeless people. You can find a link to the 2025 point-in-time count in this story at jaxtoday.org. We're going to have highs in the 80s today here in Jacksonville, upper 80s west of Highway 301, mid 80s along the I-95 corridor.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Wallace Foundation, an independent, nonpartisan research foundation collaborating with grantees and partners in the arts, school leadership, and youth development. More at wallacefoundation.org. This is NPR.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, with the Florida legislative session nearing its May 2nd conclusion, we look at pending bills that stand to have significant local impacts. Later in the program, we catch up with Players by the Sea for a preview of the musical Waitress and a look at their post-fire future. But first, I'm joined as I am each month by Chris Hand, local government expert, attorney, and co-author with the late Senator Bob Graham of America, the Owner's Manual. Welcome, Chris. Good morning.
Good morning, Ann. Good to see you as always.
Good to see you as well. I wanted to start, if we could, with a topic that has been drawing a lot of headlines in Tallahassee, but around the state, surrounding a foundation that was created by the governor's wife, Casey DeSantis, called the Hope Florida Foundation. There's been some terrific reporting by some outlets in the state, including the Miami Herald and the Times in Tampa. Can you just sort of catch us up on why this foundation is at the center of this controversy and why this controversy seems to kind of keep going?
Well, it is, and it really probably at this point now sort of 6+ years into the governor's 2 terms, probably the biggest scandal that the DeSantis administration has had to deal with at this point. Just to sort of set the stage a little bit, obviously one of the programs that Florida administers is Medicaid, which is a healthcare program, sort of government-financed healthcare program, particularly for financially challenged citizens. It uses private providers to help run that program. The state had a legal dispute with a company called Centene, which was one of those providers, regarding Centene's what are called pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs. That resulted in a settlement of tens of millions of dollars to the state of Florida. As part of that settlement, $10 million ended up with the Hope Florida Foundation, which was something unbeknownst to many people, including in the Florida legislature. Given the role of Mrs. DeSantis and others in Hope Florida Foundation, that has become a significant scandal for a variety of reasons. Number one, the fact that this money that was part of this settlement, and there's some dispute, Ann, about was it actually part of the overall amount? Was it a separate donation? Either way, there's been some controversy about that. But this money ended up with Hope Florida Foundation without the legislature knowing about that.
That's kind of the first concern.
Yeah, exactly. So there's sort of a process issue here. How did this settlement happen and these funds come in without the Florida legislature, which under the state constitution is the appropriating body in the state, know about this? But then number two is potentially how those funds were used, because there's evidence that those funds were channeled to opposition to Amendment 3. As people will recall, on last November's ballot, there were 2 very controversial amendments that had lots of funding coming in, pro and con, and one was Amendment 3, which would have legalized small amounts of recreational marijuana here in the state of Florida.
In which the governor opposed.
Opposed and achieved majority support, but not enough to act the 60% threshold we need to pass constitutional amendments in this state. Those $10 million from Hope Florida Foundation then ended up involved in the effort to defeat Amendment 3. So this has become a major source of controversy with the Florida legislature, particularly the Florida House of Representatives, led by a representative named Alex Andrade from the Pensacola area, really leading the push to investigate how all of this happened. There's a variety of different Tallahassee stakeholders involved, the governor, the first lady, the Florida House of Representatives, the new Florida Attorney General, James Utmeyer, who was Ron DeSantis' chief of staff when some of this happened. So it really is probably the biggest scandal that the DeSantis administration has faced. And it also shows a new dynamic in Tallahassee. And, really for the first 6 years of the DeSantis administration, there was relative cooperation between the governor's office and the legislature. As often happens as a governor nears the end of his term, that has changed significantly in this session. And one of the ways we're seeing the legislature step up and reassert its co-equal role in our state government is through investigations like this Hope Florida Foundation.
And as I mentioned, I mean, the reporting that has been done on this by Politico and the Tampa Bay Times and the Miami Herald has kind of initiated this, but it is truly the zeal of some of these lawmakers to dig further into it that has carried this to the stage that it is now. And, there is people, claiming that the man who's now the attorney general and formerly Ron DeSantis' chief of staff, they're using words like, subpoena and money laundering in connection with this. He's the top law enforcement officer, James Uthmeyer is, in the state of Florida. What, practically speaking, could happen? We know that there's, pressure from the House to look further into this, but from a legal standpoint, what are the possible options given that the person that is sort of at the center of this is also the Attorney General of Florida?
I think we're a ways away from that, Ann, because, I think we're still very much in the kind of investigatory stage of what happened here. And obviously, the State House of Representatives is the body at this point, in addition to the continued kind of work of different media outlets, as you suggested earlier, that is continuing to look into this. Until the Speaker of the House tells his colleagues that this process has sort of played itself out, I think that's one thing we can expect to watch over the rest of session and beyond. And quite frankly, I think it's very unlikely at this point that the state legislature is going to finish its work on May 2nd this year as they're supposed to. But
Really?
they are probably going to go into overtime, maybe have special sessions. It doesn't look like they're there in terms of a budget and some other matters at this point. So I think at this point, the best guess is that as long as the House is meeting in 2025 and maybe beyond, it will continue to kind of look into and investigate. So we're really, I think, still in the investigatory stage of this. We're beginning to get some additional explanations from people associated with the Hope Florida Foundation, other people. You might recall that just in the last several days, the person who is the executive director of that foundation has now stepped aside. There was some concern that that foundation had not filed its legally required filings with the Internal Revenue Service, like the 990 filing and others that would reveal key information. Those filings have now occurred, albeit, sort of after the time they were supposed to. So there's a change in personnel. There's now some controversy about whether the attorney for Hope Florida Foundation can and will testify before the Florida House of Representatives and the legislature in general. And so we're very much still in an investigatory phase, I think, with a lot more to be learned about exactly what this transaction was and what, if any, laws in Florida did it implicate.
And we should be clear, nothing has attached to the First Lady, Casey DeSantis. There's no indication that she knew anything about this money being transferred, whether or not it was mishandled or not. And the governor himself has said this is basically an attempt by Republican leaders that disagree with him and the media and liberal Democrats to smear him and damage his wife's chances potentially of a run for governor.
Yeah, he has certainly characterized this as a political act by, people who are political opponents or skeptics of his in the legislature. Of course, what's very interesting from a political standpoint, and as this is largely an argument among Republicans in Tallahassee, that the focus right now is the governor and some others who you described, as you said, not really on Mrs. DeSantis and her her involvement with the Hope Florida Foundation, but it's being led by Republicans in the state House of Representatives. So what we really are seeing is a rebalancing of that relationship between the executive branch and the legislative branch. For the last 6 years, we've had a relationship that was heavily tilted in favor of the executive branch on a variety of matters, including fiscal matters during the pandemic and funds that came into the state and how those were used and allocated. The legislature really deferred to the governor in ways that legislators generally have not over time. My former boss and mentor, Bob Graham, when he was governor, I think some of his most sleepless nights were dealing with fellow Democrats who controlled the legislature at that time because there was a real interest in the part of the legislature in protecting its institutional prerogatives and making sure that it was the true co-equal branch of government. We've seen a lot less of that over the last 6 years, but it's really come roaring back with a vengeance, largely led by the House Speaker, Danny Perez, who I think has, and the Senate President, Ben Albritton as well, but Speaker Perez, I think, has really been the one who's been front and center in trying to sort of reassert the legislature's role in the governmental process. And when that happens, these are the sorts of clashes that you can sometimes see occur.
If you're just joining us, we're talking to Chris Hand about the latest news from the legislation, the Florida legislature, as they head into what is scheduled to be their last week of the legislative session, but according to Chris, likely not. If you'd like to join our conversation, if you have questions or comments, you can call us at 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can reach out on social media. Moving from the Hope Florida Foundation, but just on that power dynamic, how have we seen the governor's priorities this session be shaped or molded by the fact that the legislature, the GOP is no longer basically willing to be subservient to his wishes?
Well, I think it's been a radical change from one where the governor in previous sessions could feel some reassurance that his priorities in some form or fashion were probably going to make it through the legislature to one where in 2025, and this dynamic will only kind of, I think, probably increase in 2026, one where they are not likely to make it through the legislature. And we're seeing that in a variety of different issues. We'll see this in the budget. Obviously, the governor proposes a budget each year as part of the process. It's the legislature that actually passes a budget. There's already been skirmishes between the governor and the legislature over vetoes he made in last year's budget, and then they're overriding those vetoes. I think that dynamic's going to continue forward with the budget. I think also in other areas as well. The governor proposed a plan to cut taxes. The legislature essentially said that's dead on arrival. And in fact, the governor had wanted to make some changes on property taxes. The State House Speaker then turned around and said, no, we're not going to do that. But what I want to do is cut the state sales tax, the foundation sales tax, from 6% to 5.25%. So again, that's another area. So I think in issue after issue, what we're seeing is a level of debate and controversy between the governor and particularly the State House of Representatives we haven't seen before. He's issued more veto threats this year probably than at any year during the legislative session. One example is the Senate and the House are moving forward on legislation that would restore transparency to the process of selecting university presidents.
Yeah.
It used to be the case that was, covered by the, Florida government and the Sunshine Law. You kind of knew who was applying. You could track that process to the end. That changed in 2022, where the process became essentially closed until there were finalists for a university presidency. And then at that point, the public might become aware.
And that was changed at his request. Is that right? The governor?
Correct. Yeah. And the idea, the theory behind it was that we've got candidates who aren't applying because, early on in the process, it might become public who they are. That's generated some controversy in terms of who has been selected for these jobs, probably most notably at the University of Florida, where former U.S. Senator Ben Sasse became president as a result of that process.
And resigned under a cloud of all kinds of concerns about misspending.
Correct. And so, now the legislature is doing a variety of things. One, trying to bring transparency back to that process and essentially reverse the 22 2022 change, but also make some changes in university governance, with the perception being that those would kind of remove some power from the governor and restore it to the individual university board of governors. DeSantis has threatened to veto that bill. There are other bills that the legislature is considering this year that he has also said he's going to veto. So we're really seeing a big difference in that legislative relationship. And there are a lot of factors responsible for that, Ann. One is obviously the fact that the governor's now, in the last 2 years of his term, there's going to be a new governor in January 2027. So there's typically some realignment that occurs with that. But I think politically, there's also a big factor as well. The governor ran for president in 2024. A number of the members of the legislature supported him in that effort. Obviously, he was unsuccessful. Donald Trump won the Republican presidential nomination and now the presidency. So I think there's an effort on part of many legislators to realign themselves around President Trump and away from Governor DeSantis, who was an opponent of President Trump in that election.
It's interesting when we were discussing, whether this was a subject for today, the idea of, the change in how presidents could be appointed. I was really surprised to see how many, presidents of universities right now are former, House speakers, House leaders, political appointees, essentially. The president of FAU, of the New College, of Northwest Florida State College, of the Manatee Sarasota State College, the State College of South Florida, and FIU. So that's a lot of schools to have, political appointees leading.
Well, and that's something that some legislators have commented on in that process, that, perhaps the perceptions of that, where you have former state government officials going into, these very high-profile university or college presidency roles, is something that legislators are now beginning to think that, the perceptions around that may not be positive. And as you said, most recently, Florida does not have a lieutenant governor at the moment because the former lieutenant governor, Jeanette Nunez, is now the interim president at Florida International University. So there have been a variety of these kind of high-profile roles, educational roles, that former state government leaders have gone into. I think the legislature is getting some feedback about that, and that's helping to drive some of these potential changes.
I want to take a call from John in St. Augustine. Good morning, John. Go ahead.
Well, good morning. I was curious if you knew the status of a couple of bills I heard about. One of them would require, as part of requiring auto-body shops to report anybody that comes in for service, it would force Floridans to put a front license plate on their car. And then the other one is forcing Floridians to register their pet.
Yeah, I know that the pet registry was being discussed in committee this week, but I don't know the status of it.
I think so. There is some, so I'll address those in reverse order. The pet registration is something that has generated some controversy, as you can imagine. Everyone's very attached to their pets, obviously. That has been sort of working through particularly the State House committee process. I think uncertain at this point what the future of that bill. I'm not as familiar with the license plate bill that John mentions there. John, what I would suggest on both of those is you live in St. Augustine, making sure you are kind of reaching out to your state senator is probably Tom Leak, and obviously you're in a state House district as well. Make sure you reach out to those two offices to kind of get a full updated status, and even more importantly, to make sure those legislators know how you feel about the subject. One of the things that, and I've done some work, and you mentioned with Senator Graham over the years on the issue of effective citizenship and citizens using their citizenship skills. That's particularly important at a time like now during the state legislative session, that our legislators hear from citizens about what they think the state's priorities ought to be and how they feel about individual legislation. So, John, one thing I would encourage you to do is reach out to your senator and representatives' offices, make sure that they give you the up-to-the-minute status update, and make sure they know how you feel about this particular legislation, because that's, they're here to sort of, help channel those feelings about particular pieces of legislation.
We have a call from Kendra in Mandarin. Good morning, Kendra. Go ahead.
Good morning. It's become quite clear that the priorities of Governor DeSantis are anti-intellectualism and really pro-white Christian nationalism policy. This is exemplified in some of his anti-literacy policies in K through 12, his what you were just previously discussing within the colleges, that high level of control, and also pulling programs that simply support or tell the truth about historically underprivileged minorities or other groups. And then being, the anti-vaccine, he's far too educated to deny the efficacy of vaccines, but his base is the pro-segregationist. I think DeSantis really wants to model his governorship after George Wallace or Barry Goldwater. This is the same old tired policy that propagated segregation, and he's not doing anything new. He's just more clever about deceiving the people. He spoke several months ago at one of the private high schools here in Jacksonville about abortion. He was with his wife, and from the time he began, it was all disinformation. He stated that one of the main reasons that abortion is legal is because certain types of people benefit from it, people such as George Soros. So this is a really anti-Semitic trope, and he's gone really, really far down the conspiracy rabbit hole.
Thank you, Kendra. Appreciate the call. Also have a call from John on the South Side. Good morning, John. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Being that you're talking about local as well as state issues, I wanted to tie one of them together, and it's the couple proposals regarding the condo, the reforms of the existing condo bill that they had passed that put a big burden on many condo owners around the state, as milestone inspection reports needed to be turned in by the end of last year, December 31st. And as a result, assessments have gone through the roof. Many people can't afford them. It's hurt the existing older condo market. But in the process, when you ask locally about what's going on, how many were turned in, what it looks like, I was told that there were 29 turned in out of 167 associations. The building department doesn't know how many needed to have been turned in. They're claiming to have just be taken in the paperwork. And then at the same time, we had the Phoenix Art District building collapse into Main Street last month. We have there's a historic black-owned National Mercantile Realty and Improvement Company building right next to the $350 million county courthouse. That the roof has collapsed, and now they're talking. And it's been owned by the city since '93.
John, do you have a question for Chris in particular?
Yeah. What does it look like in terms of is the state passing legislation that the city is actually in accord with, trying to look out for not only the financial interests but the safety concerns that we have regarding buildings in Duval County?
It's a good question, John, and I will let you know we're going to delve deeper into the condo issue next Wednesday. So if you have some specific questions on that front, you can send them to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. But Chris?
Well, I think there's a variety of different legislative initiatives that touch on some of the issues that John is talking about in this session. One is, and again, you're going to get into it in a different show, but one is this bill as it relates to condos. As everyone knows, in the aftermath of the Surfside tragedy where that building collapsed in South Florida, the state imposed a number of new kind of maintenance responsibilities on condo associations throughout the state to make sure their buildings were safe. Many of those are very expensive. There's been concern about the law did not provide sufficient flexibility for different condos, and as a result has led to significant increase in condo fees and assessments and those types of things. There's been an effort to talk about trying to right-size that in this year's legislature. In fact, there's a local legislator, Senator Jennifer Bradley from Clay County, who's taken sort of a leadership role on that. The status of those bills at the moment is somewhat uncertain, whether they're going to come out of the legislature or not. But there are other bills that touch on some of the issues that John has talked about in terms of the state's impact on the way the local government does things. One, for example, is there are two bills, one filed in each house, that would deal with what are called community redevelopment areas. Jacksonville Today reported on that just this week. Those are kind of areas that the city can set up. We have 7 here in Jacksonville to ensure kind of additional investment into those areas to deal with blight or affordable housing or infrastructure, a variety of things. There are a couple of bills in Tallahassee right now that would essentially end CRAs, which I think would be a matter of great concern to cities and counties around the state who use those to help encourage reinvestment in areas that need it. So John raises a good point. There's a lot of actions that happen in Tallahassee that have huge local impacts, including on things like the safety and future of whether it's historic buildings or other structures.
And the CRA bill that you mentioned, I mean, that does have a lot of people really kind of panicking. There are, 3 of these in St. Augustine, including Lincolnville, and a new one, kind of the West City, which is just getting started, and is depending on those dollars that are reinvested in the community through this tax reinvestment. There are 7 in Duval County, 3 of them downtown, and the DIA, the Downtown Investment Authority, is also very opposed to the idea that these could be taken away. Is there what are you hearing about the rationale to do away with CRAs?
There's been some skepticism in the legislature about CRAs for a number of years. They passed some reforms back in 2019, just over 5 years ago. But the subject sort of quieted after that. I think there have been some challenges with a few CRAs in other parts of the state that have led them to, potentially sort of provide this scrutiny. But as you say, Ann, they're crucially important. Just take a couple of examples here in Jacksonville. One CRA that was hugely successful was the one that was called the JIA CRA. River City Marketplace up near the airport was largely developed because that CRA was able to sort of invest funds that came in. And the way, so people know, the way CRAs tend to work is it's a designated area of the community, and they are
Typically blighted in some way.
That's right, and that require, some assistance with infrastructure or other priorities. And they use a tool called tax increment financing, TIF. And essentially what that means is once a CRA is declared, you essentially cap the property taxes that have been received in that area over that time. That capped amount is continually what still goes to the local government entity, but any amount over that in the future is retained by the CRA, so it can be invested directly in that neighborhood to deal with blight or to help with infrastructure, again, other sort of key priorities for that area to help encourage reinvestment. We have one in Arlington, for example, Renew Arlington right now, which is being used to kind of help revitalize that historic neighborhood. 3 in downtown. There's 2 in Jacksonville Beach. There's been one in the Sutel Moncrief area in northwest Jacksonville. JIS area, you mentioned 3 in St. Augustine. There are many of these across the state, really to help make sure that certain neighborhoods that need some intensive care get that intensive care and can fight blight in some other areas as well. So a lot of concern by cities and counties. Now, at this point, it's unclear whether these bills will move forward or not. And the 2 bills that are pending are very different. One would essentially close CRA sooner rather than later and not allow any more projects after October 1st of this year. There's another that says, well, hang on, we might do this in the future, but as long as projects are finished by the closure date, then they can go forward. So 2 very different approaches. We'll just have to see whether they move or not in this year's session.
We've got a call from Tom on the west side. Good morning, Tom. Go ahead.
Good morning to y'all. My question is about the earlier issue on Amendment 3. I'm wondering if the state can be compelled to put Amendment 3 back on the ballot because it was apparently the election was tainted by illegal activity, and also the margin was very close.
Thanks, Tom.
Tom, I'm not familiar with a legal vehicle that would require the state to put that back on the ballot because obviously, look, no matter sort of what happened with Hope Florida Foundation, it's always impossible to pinpoint with certainty why did a ballot measure not succeed. You require 60% plus 1 here in Florida. The amendment on reproductive rights came very close to that. It sort of ended up with about 57%. Amendment 3 was majority support, but nothing. So I'm not sure what legal vehicle one could use to compel the state to put that back on the ballot. I do think Amendment 3 will be returning in some form or fashion in future elections. I think we'll probably see versions of both of these amendments again. Now, one key question, Tom, and I think this is something that every citizen should be paying close attention to, is what are going to be the rules around how those amendments or any future amendments can go back on the ballot? That's been an area of, again, debate between the governor and the legislature. The governor earlier this year wanted to make a variety of changes to the way that ballot amendments are placed on the ballot and then passed, including his proposal was to ban third-party signature gatherers outright. The legislature has not supported that. They have other changes they want to make to the process, but they have generally not agreed with some of the governor's changes. So that's one thing to keep a close eye on. Again, one of the main ways we as citizens can be involved in the state government process, beyond obviously engaging with our elected officials, is to place matters on the ballot. And so I think it's a good idea for any citizen to pay close attention to what are the rules around that going to be. And that is a big issue in the legislature this particular session, and a big subject of disagreement between the governor and the legislature. So certainly something to keep an eye on for the rest of session, however long that lasts.
And certainly in regards to this specific question, I mean, when it comes to amendments and the way that they are advertised or fought, there's always dark money involved that is a little squirrely. And so if that were the threshold for, a recall effort of some kind, probably they would all be subject to that.
Yeah, and again, voters, regardless of what the different factors were, the amendment did not reach the required 60% plus one standard. That sort of is it as far as Amendment 3 is concerned. I don't think there's any legal process that would exist out there that would revive Amendment 3 in that form. But again, I do expect that issue to come back on a future ballot, whether that's in 2026 or 2028 and beyond. I think we can count on that coming back. And important for citizens to pay very close attention to what are those rules and how is state government shaping those rules for that or any future amendment.
We've got a call from Kathy in Nocatee. Good morning, Kathy. Go ahead.
Good morning. I had a question. There was a gentleman who was arrested in Miami and released because he was a U.S. citizen from Georgia. But in the process, our state attorney general sent a letter to law enforcement stating that he would not back up what a federal judge stated down in Miami, that they cannot arrest and follow that procedure. It just seems like, how can our state attorney general decide to not follow the judiciary at all? I mean, is our legislature willing to do something about that?
Thanks, Kathy.
Well, Kathy, with what's going on right now between the executive branches and the legislative branches, this could well be one of a variety of subjects they include. But as you know, we've begun seeing this at a variety of levels of government, notably in the federal government in some ways and in the state government as well. I think it's very important to sort of remind people how our both federal and state constitutions work, in that we have three co-equal branches of government: executive, legislature, and judiciary. And it is incumbent. This is not optional. This is not something people have can choose among alternatives. Court orders, whether they are federal court orders or whether they are state court orders, have the force of law. They have to be obeyed. They have to be implemented. And I think that's an issue we're seeing kind of, there's some push-pull on that at multiple levels of government, people saying they're not going to follow court orders. That's not an option. This is not sort of, something that's merely a suggestion or a recommendation. A court order has the force of law. State government or federal government, to the extent that those orders apply directly to them, or local government for that matter, are obligated to follow those orders. That is sort of a foundation of our constitutional system. Again, we've begun to see a little pushback on that at the federal level and maybe in some ways at the state level as well. But I just did want to make clear to our listeners that, court orders are not suggestions. They're not recommendations. They're not, here's some best practices or good ideas. They're the force of law, and government has to abide by those. They can appeal them. If they don't agree with them, they can appeal them. There's a process they can go through to challenge those orders, but they can't just simply refuse to follow them. They're the law.
We have a call from Daryl in St. Augustine. Good morning, Daryl. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning, Ann. A governor dipping his fingers into the health care money. What a surprise. I feel like I've been here before somehow with our senator. That's my first point. The second one is that Mr. Yarborough's bill, the peeling free kill, passed every single Senate and House committee meeting by flying numbers, and it seems to be stuck in some back room. Sounds like they're going to even bring it to the floor for a House vote or for a vote, because pretty sure it would pass. And that would be contrary to the health industry agenda. So I've really come to the conclusion that the entire Florida health industry and government is working together in a pretty corrupt way.
Daryl, thanks. And we know, Daryl, of course, you've been very active yourself in trying to repeal the so-called free kill law. Chris, there has been movement on this effort to overturn that law. But there has also been a lot of other health-related initiatives that the state has been looking at involving themselves in, including things like fluoridation, or whether or not teenagers are obligated to tell their parents if they're going to get tested for an STD.
Yeah, healthcare always a subject that sort of, is a major one that any legislature considers, and this one is no different. And on a couple of the bills you just mentioned, obviously and this, I think, for many is a little bit of a surprise, because for years it was sort of established science that, and very common practice for city and county governments around the country to, add small amounts of fluoride to, to water supplies as a way of trying to ensure dental health, which obviously has other health implications as well. In the last couple of years, there's begun to be some pushback to that practice of fluoridation of water supplies. There have been, a number of local government jurisdictions in the last year or two that have now decided to remove fluoridation process from their water supplies. Most notably, the Miami-Dade County Commission just in the last month voted to remove fluoride from their local water supplies. The mayor of Miami-Dade County, Daniela Levine Cava, has vetoed that legislation, so it's kind of unclear what will happen there. Here, there has not been sort of local movement on that. That's something that's sort of a decision that kind of JEA, since it manages the water supply, is involved with. But if the state legislature passed a statewide ban on fluoridation, any water system in the state of Florida would have to stop providing fluoride. So again, potentially major health issue that the state is considering making a statewide decision on, as opposed to allowing cities and counties to make their own individual decisions. And as you say, Ann, some rules regarding parental consent and, people under the age of 18, their access to birth control, whether or not things like STIs have to be reported. Again, all examples of the way the legislature involves itself in healthcare, but also involves itself in decisions that many people argue are best left to local communities or local families and others. I think that's one change we've seen in the legislature really in the last decade or so, its willingness to sort of make statewide decisions on issues that previously were sort of more considered to be local decisions.
And in terms of the fluoridation bill, I mean, just so that folks know, we do know that our local senators that voted in favor of that include Senator Yarborough and Senator Bradley and Senator Leek. So, if we're interested in weighing in. But that has been buoyed by the state surgeon general, who has himself become obviously a lightning rod in a lot of medical issues, opposing fluoridation.
Well, and obviously, so you're referring to Dr. Joseph Ladapo, who's the somewhat controversial Surgeon General appointed by Governor DeSantis, who has, as you say, has been a figure who, on a variety of issues, whether that was kind of COVID prevention, whether that's, the wearing of masks, vaccines, now fluoridation, has taken sort of different positions than a number of folks in the medical community. I think one thing you found, and this is sort of a bit of a new dynamic, is where you found sort of medical experts and medical organizations really being on the opposite side of a lot of these issues, whether that's folks in the sort of larger dental community on the issue of fluoridation being opposed, dentists and dental experts being opposed to some of these efforts, right? Yeah. On the bill you talked about in terms of birth control and STIs and whether patients should be able to have confidentiality with their doctors on those. a lot of opposition to kind of what the legislature has been exploring from organizations like the American Association of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. So that is one dynamic we've been tracking in legislatures, not just here in Florida, but around the country, as you're seeing some of these healthcare actions, a sort of new sort of divergence between legislators and some of these medical and healthcare experts on a number of these issues.
We're going to have to leave it there, but Chris, I'm curious if you have to forecast, we were saying this is the end of the legislative session, the final week that we're going to be heading into. You don't seem to think it's going to end on schedule. Do you have a sense as to what might happen?
Well, I was in Tallahassee yesterday, and the sense I got from talking to a number of people was that it is very unlikely they will end on May 2nd at this point. They are not where they need to be from a budget standpoint. The House and the Senate, their differences are significant, and to be finished by May 2nd, there's a certain timeline, a schedule they need to be accomplishing, and they're not there yet. So on that, whether it's some of the other issues between the governor, I think it's unlikely they finish on May 2nd. Whether they extend the session or whether they come back for special sessions after May 2nd depends where we are right now. But at the moment, I think it's very unlikely we're going to see that hanky drop on May the 2nd and have them sine die the session.
All right. Well, Chris Hand, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Ann. Good to see you as always.
All right. Up next, we catch up with the Players by the Sea for a preview of the musical Waitress and a look at how the theater is recovering from a recent fire. Welcome back. Well, a feel-good musical hit a slight setback this month when the performance venue caught on fire. But the show must go on, and here to tell us about the upcoming performance of the musical Waitress is Raquel Clory, the actor playing Jenna, the titular lead role. Good morning, Raquel.
Good morning. How are you?
Good to see you. We're also joined by Shauna Akers and Rashonda Campbell, who played Dawn and Becky, respectively, who are Jenna's co-workers at the restaurant. Good morning.
Good morning.
And we're joined by Bradley Akers, who is managing director at Players by the Sea. Good morning, Bradley.
Good morning, Ann.
Bradley, this fire was certainly a bit of a setback. I guess the damage not so much from the fire, but sort of from the sprinkler system. Tell us what happened.
That's right. So overnight, an isolated fire broke out in our facility. Thankfully, nobody was there.
This was a couple weeks ago?
This was, just going on about 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
And the fire sprinkler system did its job, put the fire out, which is great. But there is significant water damage from flooding from the sprinklers. And so it's rendered the building inoperable, which for a theater, we have to be operable to tell our stories, right? So it did set this production back.
So what is, what is the money impact that the theater is seeing? Is it substantial?
I believe it will be substantial.
Is it covered by insurance?
Well, that's what we're working on now.
Mm-hmm.
But as a nonprofit organization, relying on the support of the community to see the productions, be part of the productions, but also provide financial contributions. If we're at a standstill currently, it puts the organization in flux. And we were preparing to celebrate. Well, we are celebrating our 60th anniversary season. This was certainly not on our bingo card.
Yeah. And I'm sorry to hear about it. So how can people help?
Right now, we are encouraging people to stay tuned, but we're going to have two ways of support. One is volunteerism. We rely on the support of our volunteers. Our actors sitting around this table, they're all volunteers, to help once we're ready with remediation and recovery. And then the other way is just going to be financial contributions and support from the community that way. Those are going to be our two major ways of helping.
But there's a little bit of a wait right now while you figure out kind of what the next step forward is.
Unfortunately, and we as theater artists are always chomping at the bit. We're ready to perform, ready to do things. And so it's hard. The waiting game is hard.
All right. Well, we're going to talk about the upcoming production of The Waitress, the musical, in just 2 minutes. Let's take a short break.
The Electro Lounge invites you to the Brian Gooding Planetarium at Mosh, May 30th, pairing the best sounds of the Electro Lounge with the captivating and immersive visuals of a trip through the cosmos. It's a journey that will be both intimate and expansive, scientifically rigorous yet surreal. Join us for an experience that will redefine what it means to explore the universe with music. Visit wjct.org/events for information and tickets.
Thousands of Afghans who helped the U.S. military could be deported soon, with their immigration status now in jeopardy.
Things are not better for you in Afghanistan. In fact, we know that things have only gotten worse, and it just seems really unconscionable to pull the rug out from folks that we made a promise to stand behind.
I'm Deborah Becker, and we hear from Afghan refugees who say the U.S. is not keeping its promises. That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11 on WJCT News 89.9.
When you're young, it's important to have people to look up to, a family member, teacher, or even a favorite author. A new season from PBS News Student Reporting Labs explores these inspirational connections. We meet some of those students to hear more about who inspires them today and the people who shape us. Next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, if you're just joining us, we are still talking to the cast of the musical Waitress that is being performed here in town later in May, I guess. It's Waitress, and we are talking to Bradley Akers, Raquel Clory, Shauna Akers, and Rashonda Campbell. Raquel, you play the lead role of Jenna in The Waitress. Were you a fan of this musical before you got this role?
Yes, I 100% was. Honestly, it was one of the roles that I would always, say, that is my dream role. That's my dream role. And I come, from working professionally in this arena, performing and singing. And I always told my husband, if ever it came down to, a theater that was doing Waitress by us, like whether I got paid or not, I am going to do it. I'm going to find a way. I'm going to pour my soul into it. And I auditioned, and I was actually quite nervous because there was an amazing turnout. There was a lot of people, a lot of talented, gifted people. And I just felt super honored and blessed when I got that call that, hey, we want to offer you the role as Jenna. And I cried.
Did you? What is it about the character that is so appealing and that speaks to you in that way?
Yeah, Jenna has a lot of layers. And, I may not be as young as I once was. I do have 4 children, my husband and I. And just her emotions when she finds out, spoiler alert, she is expecting, and what that can do to you emotionally when you're not prepared for it, or when you thought you were prepared for it, even so much, the hormones, the different things that you go through your mind. So I felt like I related to her in that sense, and not knowing what's going to come next. And I feel like Jenna is a little bit in that scenario. She doesn't know what's going to happen, so.
Yeah, and we should say, it's based around this character. She is a talented pie maker at a diner called Joe's Pie Diner. I don't know if you have any actual baking skills, but part of the cast is rounded out by these 2 characters that are sort of like this, her support team, and you're also waitresses, right, at this diner.
Yes.
So what is the most fun part of it, Rashonda, for you in this team that you and Shauna perform?
I would think just the relationships that we have, the chemistry that we have built together as we have been through this process has been phenomenal. They literally are my support system. We encourage each other. We truly love each other. And it's not just with the girls, it's with the entire cast, the crew. I mean, this show is just going to be fabulous. It really is. And so I'm just happy and blessed to be a part of it. And then our connection on stage, we're not even acting sometimes because it's so genuine and we really do love each other.
Shauna, what is the most fun for you in this role?
I think probably I feel myself as a Dawn. I'm like that goofy, silly, quirky girl. And so being able to kind of be myself on stage has been a lot of fun, but also having such a support system with these ladies. And we also have understudies too, Alana and Christine, and like building that chemistry with them as well. And like being such a support system of these ladies has just been an amazing experience all around.
And this is a feel-good musical. I mean, you're talking about some of the drama behind it, and there is this unexpected pregnancy, a marriage that's kind of falling apart, but it also is a love story.
Yes, it is, and it's actually more so even about hope. You know, the light at the end of the tunnel. It's about family that might not even be blood family. You know, it's about community, which is probably the perfect musical for Players by the Sea right now, where we are. You know, in this whole transition in this moment.
Bradley, what was it about Raquel that you were able to decide that she was appropriate for this role out of all the talent that you had to choose from?
Oh my goodness. Well, Raquel was right. There were so many people there. Raquel came in, and what I am always so amazed by with Raquel, and she doesn't know this, I haven't told her this yet, is that I watch her in the room and she showed up to work. She showed up in the moment, present, ready, and available, which you always ask for actors to do. So when we saw that in the audition room, that was the key moment for us. Talent is dynamite. That's just, that's a given with Raquel. But there is a subtle strength and power that's required for the role of Jenna. And when Rocky, as we call Rocky, when Rocky showed up, she delivered that. And then the director, Jeremy, was instantly taken by that. And here we are.
And so here we are. The production, as you said, is you're aiming for end of May, but you're not sure where you're going to perform it, and you're not sure exactly when. So what should people know if they're interested in supporting the theater and coming to the show?
We're trying to maintain a big digital presence because that's all we have currently. We're trying to provide as many updates as we are able to in a timely manner. I would recommend anybody just follow the journey with us. That's the beauty of community theater, is that it's about the community. And
Where's the best place for them to do that, to follow?
They can follow us on our social media channels, which is Facebook and Instagram, but also we're trying to keep our website having up-to-date information right there on the landing page when you join.
Well, congrats to all of you. Good luck with everything. Bradley Akers, Raquel, Rocky, Clory, Shauna Akers, and Rashonda Campbell. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
All right, and that's our program. Thank you for listening, especially to those of you who called or emailed. You can always send feedback or suggestions to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. And if you missed anything today, you can catch our rebroadcast at 8 o'clock tonight or find our entire archive on your favorite podcast platform. The executive producer of First Coast Connect is David Luckin. Our show is produced by Stacey Bennett. And
Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or BaptistJax.com. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. Tidbits, family-owned and operated since 1985, offers dine-in, catering, delivery, and takeout at Bay Meadows, Hendricks, and Mandarin locations. Menu items include fresh sandwiches, salads, and soups, open Monday through Saturday. Online ordering and menu at clarastidbits.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
inspires you?